Greetings, BookTube. This is ML Clark with Better Worlds Theory YouTube edition. We're back. I'm exhausted, but it's really good to be able to take a moment to touch base, especially after truly being so thoroughly exhausted this last while that I thought to myself, no, I can't make time for reading. But it was exactly what I needed. So I'm looking forward to sharing today Clarkesworld's January 2025 issue, which I think just an absolutely beautiful issue to start the year, truly easing us into a very difficult time with some existential abstract components, which come together quite beautifully on the page. It is a patient issue, and it's filled with a lot of worldly thought, which I think a lot of us need sometimes when we're too focused, whether on our own personal lives or the immediate politics in our purview. I'm joined as always by my special guest, The Highway, though it is a fairly sedate afternoon. I've lost my usual slot on Sundays for recording. Right now, I am helping with the homeschooling of the kipper I introduced you to in the last video. So it definitely has disrupted a little bit of my workflow. And we're a long way off from her being able to enjoy science fiction on the same level that I do. So we can't quite talk about any of those things yet. Maybe one day. So for those of you who are not able to see the screen, you're missing out, I have to say, on a really lovely cover. This was breathtaking. When this piece first launched, I just shared a photo of the cover art because it was beautiful. And now that I've read the issue, it matches the contents so well. That abstraction, that sort of broad strokes appearance, literally with a giant hand with a paintbrush in the middle of the canvas. The paintbrush has some blue paint in it, which connects to this wending of cloud form and river form just coming out in all directions around it. And the river form flows down throughout the canvas, carving out spaces between the forest and the surroundings. It's softly done. It's quite ethereal in its overall feel, and that does speak exceptionally well to the more abstracted level, the existential playing field of not all, but many of the stories here. So, as always, we're going to go through the issue with the short stories first, then we'll move on to the nonfiction, which includes a year in review for 2024, which was tied into the call for votes. A very narrow window is what Neil Clark always does for folks to vote on the best ofs. That's already happened because we are, of course, recording at a little bit of a remove, but it's a really lovely list just to refresh your memory on all of the wonderful fiction and also art that was produced in the magazine the year prior. So we're going to start. Obviously, your reading order might change depending on whether you're reading with a desktop view or a mobile, but if it's the one column layout, you'll be following my reading order here. We start out with a fairly meditative piece. It's more of a concept that allows you just to sit impressionistically with how the technology might be used for you in your circumstances. When There Are Two of You, a documentary by Zun Yu Tan, reflects from a few different perspectives on what it might be like to live in a world where a kind of cloning technology through artificial intelligence is indeed possible. So we have sentience is a program that truly does allow for duplication, and it means that people do get to marry versions of themselves, and they might be able also to disconnect from kinds of familial relationships that cause trauma. And yet, I would not read this expecting a kind of forward momentum. I would instead recommend reading this piece in thinking about just the consequences or possibilities that would emerge from a world in which this has become a normalized part of our culture, knowing that some people have the ability to clone themselves and maybe through this technology, and maybe that copy, that artificial version might even outlive them, or the use case for the original copying, duplication, or suppression of the original form might pass on or change in some way, and then we still have to live with the consequences of who we were or the ways in which we tried to navigate difficult circumstances through the crutch of technology. So there is movement through some of the characters, but I definitely see this more as a series of vignettes that invite you to think about how impressionistically the world would be changed, our notion of the struggles we would have to maintain connections, bonds with one another, with this one little upgrade from our current status quo. So, again, when I said the cover of the issue reflects well on the piece itself, there is this broad strokes approach to some of the storytelling, which is a wonderful way of thinking about speculative form. It's always supposed to be a kind of lens that allows us to see our own world more clearly. And so it doesn't always need to have the propulsive action element. It can be a series of moments that allow us to think how tiny changes or changes that might already exist but under another name have affected us and may have consequences that spiral out beyond the original case parameters. The next piece by Gunnar de Winter is called Child of the Mountain. And Gunnar here has a piece with really lovely, precise sentences depicting an end state scenario in which we have an individual who has being intended to help create the new next stage of a meditative order that is trying to sustain the world among so much death. It is inspired by definitely spiritual traditions, religious traditions that rely on the natural world to help with death. So the idea of using vultures to take care of the dead. And yet it's a little bit more than any one monastic order, so I'm cautious about trying to pin it down to any real world tradition. Chime, at the center of this, is a caretaker among sisters of this order who continue to regenerate based on the technology that they have developed. So they are both monastic in a way that invokes tradition. The natural world, the vultures and the presence obviously have their role, but there is also something very future forward, and yet there is a sense of being stunted. And it's not just because of Chime's body, in terms of limitations in Chime's form. There is also an aspect to resurrection that is being overlooked. And so Chime is going to take it upon herself in the course of the story to figure out and enact that missing piece. So there's a macabre feel to some of this, and yet it also continues to reflect on that bigger abstract notion of death and resurrection, and also what it means to herald a new age. As I said, big strokes for a lot of the stories here. This one does have propulsive energy. It does have an unfurling plot line, and so it can be enjoined that way. But there is underneath it that, well, seed is definitely a term that's used with power in this work. There is a kernel of something a little bit deeper and more abstract, and that's fixation on immortality and death and cyclicality that emerges in these ancient orders, that emerges in the natural world through its own cycles, and which this particular order is trying to make happen through some advanced technology too. So a good piece to sit with when thinking about those larger components. The next piece by H. Buck is called Never Eaten Vegetables, and the title is so endearing. I'm not going to spoil exactly why it has that title. But what I'm going to say about this piece, it's a long one. It's a novelette, 15,000 words, and you wouldn't have expected that necessarily from the opening, because the opening is so poetic in its description of a generation ship of sorts. It's a ship that's carrying frozen embryos. And well, they don't stay frozen for very long. There are problems that emerge, but it unfurls into something much bigger. There's a mystery at the heart. There is a lot of wise, cynical commentary about corporate overreach and the way that it destroys and erodes at elements of wonder, which tie in a little bit to my own story in the next issue. But I think this one just does such a fabulous job of integrating the ways in which people can claim to be trying to create some grand new venture and at the same time destroy it from within by their own selfish, greedy ways. Uh, so much emerges over the course of this story, but that deeper meditation of what it means to become something and to have the choice of purpose versus having purpose thrust upon oneself. So many of these deeper abstracted elements emerge overlaid on a really excellent little mystery here in terms of what happened with this generation ship, what caused the circumstances that allow some of the entities on board to live and some of them to die. It is done in such a meditative way at the outset that you are given this promise of something deeper, and the story 100% follows through on that promise. It is a piece that is both grounded in the material and has some very wise, deft details that are filled with pain, while still moving on a bigger and much more abstracted level of questions about procreation and purpose, of whether for machines or for human beings. So that was just lovely. Also tying into, we've got this death and life cyclicality, which comes up so much across this issue, is the temporary murder of Thomas Monroe. But because the author is Tashiro, and I've read other work by this author, I know that there's going to be, as I read it, that there was going to be a turn, because there's just something about the way this person writes, that you know there's going to be a slightly positive resolution, and it's just a slight thread of optimism, even and especially when writing about difficult things. So one of the other stories that I was quite charmed by, despite the fact that it felt so optimistic, and I don't often feel optimistic. It found optimism in a really miserable situation. It was an intergalactic smuggler's guide to homecoming, and I really quite enjoyed that piece as well. And it was my first one that I fully paid attention to from the author. And this piece as well deals with very difficult, hard themes, but with this thread, this expectation. You're going to feel satisfied by the everything coming together, even if it is maybe a little bit more optimistic than real life. It still sits well on the page. So we do have a murder of an individual who unfortunately can't stay dead because their family has paid a lot for them to be able to be resurrected, no matter how many times they want to end things themselves. And they just can't seem to get out of their family's grasp. So Thomas Monroe has unfortunately been killed by people who wanted and did succeed in robbing him of the family money. But there's more to all of this than meets the eye, and I'm not going to spoil it. I'm just going to say that it is, again, just like the last piece, H.H. Paka's story, that sits in very concrete and difficult details, but moves beyond them. And although this one doesn't move into the same kind of abstract questions, it does move into this thread, this tone of hope that transcends sometimes the material realities and the misery of so much that surrounds us. The next piece is, I think, maybe the best of the stories as an encapsulation of the cover. This one, I think, perfectly echoes the cover, missing maybe just one element. But Beyond Everything by Wang Yanzhong, translated by Stella Jiayue Shu, is a piece that meditates on the four elements and then a fifth something. But it's just such a lovely abstracted story of first contact. It's one of those great stories of contact with another species that truly sits with the idea of encountering intelligences different from our own. And the idea here is that this envoy has been sent not because they're special, just because this is their time. They don't really have anything that is truly personalized about them. They serve as a vehicle for us to be able to experience these four elemental worlds with intelligences that the human governments sending our envoy out hope can be gleaned from, can be learned from, to improve human beings amid our own wars and our own struggle. Unfortunately, there's nothing there for this envoy to take back in terms of lessons that will fix humanity, because these other realms are inhabited by consciousnesses that exist in a state of harmony intrinsically. And so there's no way to force humanity into that kind of harmony. You can't shift one kind of matter into another completely. And so we get this lovely meditation of those limitations through water, through earth, through wind, through through fire, and then a fifth realm, which has a temporal dimension, and maybe something a little bit more than that too. But ultimately, it sits with the idea that trying to seek solutions beyond ourselves is not likely to succeed, because we do have to wrestle with what is our elemental self. Who are we? And if we understand our nature, maybe that is going to be the way forward. Uh, there is a little tiny flavor of a classic Isaac Asimov story in here, truly classic, as in one of the biggies. So I'm not going to spoil the ending, but this is a truly existential piece. And you're just meant to sit with each of those meditations, knowing what's coming next, just to enjoy the experience of reminding yourself that humanity has problems that are distinct to humanity. The problems that we have are who we are. And so losing sense of that I am is maybe our biggest problem. Out of all of these pieces, I think Meg Elison coming up with the final short fiction in this piece, Autonomy, is a little bit of a reprieve. This is a fun one. It's brief. It's got a little bit of a horror flavor to it. It's inspired by Christine, so you know that there is mechanics and there is uh, a lot of homage to a whole body of work in which technology can be used for vengeance or to manifest a kind of retribution for situations in our world that we can't fix on our own. It is, next to the other ones, I think definitely a lighter read in some ways. It's just about a figure who needs a little bit of help when dealing with some pretty awful experiences that are common to a lot of feminized people going out at night. And it's a lovely it's a lovely closer, because Clarkesworld especially does tend to have a short piece at the end that's just a way of cleansing the palate sometimes, and to add a little bit of fun. This has, I think, the most momentum of any of them in terms of just like the propulsive energy, and it has a very strong sense of voice. And it is a fun little contrast after the body of stories that focus a lot more on the broader existential components. We move on to the nonfiction with a wonderful piece on termites. And I did not think I was going to learn as much about termites as I did. Do Termites Celebrate Holidays by Priya, Sridhar. And this is a lovely essay. Like, all of these are wonderful essays to inspire writers, to help sharpen your approach to your own work. So, the idea of termites, maybe termites aren't your thing, but this is a great case study in thinking about a certain kind of a species that works together and as a result has a slightly different approach to intelligence, a slightly different approach to problem solving. So, the idea of sapience, animal consciousness in general, comes up in this piece, as well as some links to some great research. It's just, these are the kinds of traits that Clarkesworld offers to really jog. I think a lot of writers who might be wondering what their next big piece is going to be, and I do not recommend missing out on those elements just because they're not a short story themselves. There's just such a wealth of detail there, and I really look forward to seeing what Priya decides to write about next, because great voice as well. The next two pieces are interviews by Arley Sorg, and Arley has been shifting a little bit. We've got some pieces recently with artists, and these two are editors. And so we have one interview, a conversation with Diana M. Fo, and that's about Erewhon Press. Obviously, it's about Diana herself and the work that brings her to her current position. Talking about what it means to be an editor in this context. Being a book editor, of course, is different than a magazine editor, and there is a different framework or flavor for institutionality, which can come out in conversations like this, especially if you have a very reflective participant, and Diana Info absolutely is. But I also truly recommend reading these conversations together as if they too are in conversation with one another, because the other one with LaShawn and Wanak is focused on Giganotosaurus, which is obviously magazine publishing, and it has a different cadence, there's a different rhythm, learning a little bit about what brought her to her work, and the kind of representation that emerges in this publication. Reading these two essays together, I think, is just an excellent choice. It gives you a sense of the people involved in what can often seem like a very abstracted and intimidating field in general. So, in an issue that has this abstracted art and deals with so many elemental and existential questions, uh, going to this abstracted meta level of talking to editors, I think, is just a really nice pitch perfect component on top of the termites, which have a kind of groupthink larger than themselves as individuals. Just a really lovely piece altogether. And yes, I do note that Meg Ellison's Autonomy is maybe the tiny little outsider to the rule, but even then, the placement of having something fun and zippy after that wonderful bounty of reflective work speaks well to the overall issue. I really needed to read an issue like this. I am so thoroughly exhausted right now. I've been trying to manage quite a few different projects, and I'm behind on a tremendous number of them. Having this young kipper, the 15-year-old, and their sudden needs to try to stabilize their life definitely has come at an interesting time in my own as I am trying to get a few projects finished and launch into maybe a new phase in my own existence. But we don't really get to control all of the chaos that surrounds us. The world is going through a really tough moment. A lot of the pain, even in this household, that the 15-year-old is experiencing comes from impacts of what's happening in the United States, touching on geopolitics here in South America. So everything's connected. And in the middle of that, I was so stressed out. I was like, I don't have time to read. I don't have time to catch up. But I'm really glad that I made time, because being able to sit and just be present with this kind of literature is a gift that provides vocabulary. It allows one to articulate and reframe a lot of the problems one is moving through. I get to see more than ever why story matters when I am sitting with something like, again, I do think I really did enjoy Never Eaten Vegetables, and I think I'm going to be holding that in my heart for the rest of this year's by H.H. Pak, just because it has that lovely tension between the abstract, the lyric, and at the same time the concrete material, with some really delicate topics being discussed, but in a way that sits adjacent to our real world crises around similar. Just such deft strokes in so much of this inspires, calms, and provides vocabulary for the work that lies ahead. So I might have zipped through this one because I am still a little bit on borrowed time today and I have other things that I have to get back to. But I do recommend taking that moment, breathing out, enjoying a good collection of short fiction or longer fiction. I'm looking forward to sharing a best of collection with you next. And that one is going to be a slightly different array of materials. And then we'll get back to the next Clarkesworld issue, which includes one of my stories, but I'm so looking forward to seeing the rest of that TOC. So, as always, thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with me. We did kind of zip through this one today, but whatever you're reading, whatever you're enjoying, just remember to support the work that you love and try as much as you can to allow fiction to be a part of your experience of this world, because it will surprise you how much sometimes we just need that reframe, we just need that vocabulary, we need that opportunity to expand beyond ourselves and the stressors that we're moving through, which we're not going to get if we just follow a tremendous amount of doom scrolling and all the clickbait that surrounds it. We're living in a time where people want us pretty miserable, and they're succeeding sometimes. So give yourself the gift of a little good reading, and if you are so inclined, maybe the gift of writing too. Take care. Until next time, this has been ML Clark with Better Worlds Theory, YouTube edition, and with any luck, we will see each other again soon. Cheers.